The next financial shock will make 2008 look small. Picture this. It's a Tuesday morning in 2008. You wake up, check your phone, and your retirement account has vanished. Not dropped. Vanished. Your neighbor just lost his job at the car plant. Your cousin can't get a mortgage. The local diner closed last week because no one's spending money anymore. And the people on TV? The ones in suits who promised everything was fine? They're now saying the entire global financial system is on the verge of collapse. That was 2008. 15 million Americans lost their jobs. 9 million families lost their homes. Trillions of dollars in wealth evaporated overnight. Retirement funds, college savings, future plans, gone. It took a decade for most people to recover. Some never did. But here's the thing that should terrify you. 2008 was just a preview. What's coming next will make that look like a practice round. And this time, the people who are supposed to save us don't have the tools to do it. Think I'm exaggerating? Stick with me. Because by the end of this video, you're going to see exactly why the next financial shock won't just hurt. It will fundamentally reshape how money, power, and survival work in this world. And the scariest part? Most people have no idea it's coming. Before we dive in, if you want to stay ahead of what's really happening in the global economy, hit that subscribe button right now. This channel exists to cut through the noise and show you the patterns the mainstream won't talk about. Like the video if you appreciate real analysis. And drop a comment telling me, do you think we're headed for another crash, or am I just fear-mongering? Let's see where you stand. Now let's get into it. Here's what you need to understand first. 2008 happened because banks made bad bets on housing. They gave loans to people who couldn't pay them back. Then they packaged those bad loans into fancy financial products and sold them around the world like they were safe investments. When people started defaulting, the whole system seized up. Banks stopped trusting each other. Credit froze. Lehman Brothers collapsed. The dominoes started falling. And governments stepped in with a solution: bailouts. They flooded the system with money. Central banks dropped interest rates to nearly zero. They printed trillions of dollars and pumped it into the economy to keep everything from imploding. It worked. Barely. But here's the problem. That solution didn't fix anything. It just delayed the reckoning. And now, 17 years later, we're sitting on top of a financial structure that's far more fragile than it was in 2008. Let me show you why. First, let's talk about debt. In 2008, the U.S. national debt was around $10 trillion. Today, it's over $34 trillion. That's more than triple in less than 2 decades. And it's not just the U.S. global debt, both public and private, has exploded. We're talking about over $300 trillion in total global debt. To put that in perspective, that's more than 3 times the entire global economy. Think about that. The world owes more than 3 times what it produces in a year. How do you pay that back? You don't. Governments have been borrowing to pay off old debt. They've been kicking the can down the road, hoping growth will eventually catch up. But it hasn't. And now, interest rates are rising. For over a decade after 2008, central banks kept rates near zero. Borrowing was cheap. Governments, companies, and individuals loaded up on debt because money was basically free. But inflation came roaring back. And central banks had no choice but to raise rates. Now, servicing that debt costs more. A lot more. Countries that were barely managing their debt payments when rates were low are now staring at budget crises. Companies that survived on cheap loans are suddenly facing bankruptcy. And everyday people, credit card debt, car loans, mortgages, all getting more expensive. This is the trap. When debt is this high and rates go up, the system starts to break. And unlike 2008, central banks can't just drop rates back to zero and fix it. Because rates are already being used to fight inflation. They're stuck. If they lower rates, inflation spirals out of control. If they keep rates high, the economy collapses under the weight of debt. There's no good option. This is what's called a debt trap, and the entire global economy is in one. Now let's talk about the banks. You'd think after 2008, banks learned their lesson. They didn't. Sure, there are more regulations now, but banks have found new ways to take risks. One of the biggest threats right now: commercial real estate. During the pandemic, everyone started working from home. Office buildings emptied out, and they haven't filled back up. Companies realized they don't need as much office space, so they're not renewing leases. That means office buildings are losing value fast. And guess who owns a lot of those buildings? Banks. Or rather, banks hold the mortgages on those buildings. If property values collapse, those mortgages go bad. And if enough of them go bad, banks start failing. Sound familiar? It's the same pattern as 2008, just a different asset class. But this time, it's combined with higher interest rates, rising defaults, and a fragile global economy. In early 2023, we already saw a preview of this. Silicon Valley Bank collapsed. Then Signature Bank. Then First Republic. These weren't tiny banks. They were major institutions. And the government had to step in to prevent a full-blown panic. But here's the kicker. The tools they used in 2008 to stabilize the system? They're running out. Central banks can't drop rates to zero because inflation is still a problem. Governments can't afford massive bailouts because they're already drowning in debt. The safety net that caught us in 2008 has holes in it now. And that brings us to the second major threat: sovereign debt crises. When a country can't pay its debts, bad things happen. We've seen this before in places like Greece, Argentina, and Venezuela. But now, it's not just small or mismanaged economies at risk. Major developed nations are staring down the barrel of debt crises. Japan's debt-to-GDP ratio is over 260%. That means Japan owes more than 2.5 times what its entire economy produces in a year. Italy's debt is around 140% of GDP. The UK is over 100%. Even the US, with all its power and influence, is heading toward dangerous territory. And here's the thing about sovereign debt. When a government can't pay, it has three options. 1. Default. Just stop paying. But that destroys trust in the country's currency and crashes the economy. 2. Print more money. But that causes inflation. And if you print too much, you get hyperinflation. 3. Raise taxes and cut spending. But that crushes economic growth and leads to social unrest. None of these options are good. And when major economies face this choice, it doesn't just hurt them. It destabilizes the entire global system. Because modern economies are interconnected. If Japan or Italy or the UK goes into crisis, it sends shockwaves everywhere. Banks that hold their debt take losses. Trade slows down. Currencies fluctuate wildly. It's a chain reaction. And in a world where everyone is already on edge, one country's crisis can trigger a global collapse. That's the nightmare scenario. Not one isolated crash like 2008, but multiple crises happening at once. A banking crisis, a sovereign debt crisis, a currency crisis, all feeding into each other, all happening simultaneously. And that's where we are right now, sitting on the edge of a multi-layered financial catastrophe that nobody seems prepared for. Now let's talk about the third layer of this disaster: currency wars. For decades, the US dollar has been the king of global finance. Oil is traded in dollars. International debts are paid in dollars. Central banks hold dollars as reserves. This gives the US enormous power. It can print money and export inflation to the rest of the world. It can sanction countries by cutting them off from the dollar system. But that dominance is under threat, and not from some distant future scenario. It's happening right now. After the US and Europe froze Russia's dollar reserves in response to the Ukraine war, something shifted. Countries around the world realized that holding dollars isn't safe if you're not aligned with Washington. So they started looking for alternatives. China and Russia are trading in their own currencies. Saudi Arabia is discussing selling oil in yuan instead of dollars. India is buying Russian oil in rupees. The BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, are actively working on creating a new currency or payment system that bypasses the dollar. This isn't speculation. This is policy. And if the dollar loses its status as the global reserve currency, the consequences for the U.S. economy are catastrophic. Right now, the U.S. can run massive deficits because the whole world needs dollars. But if that demand drops, the value of the dollar collapses. Inflation explodes. Imports become unaffordable. The cost of servicing debt skyrockets. And the U.S. government loses its ability to simply print its way out of trouble. This is what's called a currency crisis. And it doesn't happen slowly. When confidence breaks, it breaks fast. Look at the British pound in 2022. The government announced a budget plan that spooked investors. Within days, the pound crashed and the government had to reverse course. Now imagine that happening to the dollar. The entire global financial system is built on dollar stability. If that stability cracks, we're not talking about a recession. We're talking about a complete reset of how the global economy functions. And here's the scary part. The U.S. is actively accelerating this process. Every time it weaponizes the dollar, sanctions, freezes, restrictions, it gives other countries more reason to move away from it. Every time it prints trillions to cover deficits, it erodes confidence in the currency's value. The very actions taken to maintain power are undermining the foundation of that power. It's a slow-motion collapse. And most people don't see it because it's not happening in one dramatic moment. It's happening in 1,000 small decisions made by central banks and finance ministers around the world. China stockpiling gold. Russia building alternative payment systems. Saudi Arabia hedging its bets with Beijing. Each one of these moves is a vote of no confidence in the dollar. And when enough votes pile up, the system tips. That's the third layer. Currency instability on a scale we haven't seen since the collapse of the Bretton Woods system in the 1970s. And it's happening at the same time as a debt crisis and a banking crisis. You see the problem now? This isn't one fire. It's 3 fires burning at once. And they're all feeding each other. Now let's go deeper. Layer 4. The everything bubble. After 2008, central banks didn't just save the banks. They pumped so much money into the system that it inflated the price of everything. Stocks, bonds, real estate, cryptocurrencies, classic cars. If you could invest in it, the price went up. Not because the underlying value increased, but because there was too much money chasing too few assets. This is what's called an everything bubble. And bubbles always pop. In 2021, we saw the beginning. Crypto crashed. Tech stocks collapsed. Real estate started cooling. But here's the thing. Most of those assets are still overvalued. The S&P 500 is trading at historically high valuations compared to corporate earnings. Real estate in major cities is still priced at levels that don't make sense given rising interest rates. Even bonds, traditionally the safe haven, are sitting on huge unrealized losses because rates went up. What does that mean? It means that when the next shock hits, whether it's a banking crisis, a sovereign debt default, or a currency collapse, all these overvalued assets are going to crash. And this time, the decline won't be limited to one sector. It's going to be everything. Your 401k, your home value, your savings, your investments. All of it is built on a foundation of cheap money that no longer exists. And when people realize that, the panic will be worse than 2008. Because in 2008, people could at least believe that housing was the problem and everything else was mostly fine. This time, there's no safe corner of the market. And here's the psychological factor. People are already on edge. Inflation has eaten into wages. Living costs are higher. Savings are lower. Consumer confidence is fragile. If people start seeing their assets lose value, they're going to pull back. They'll stop spending, stop investing, start hoarding cash. And when everyone does that at once, the economy grinds to a halt. This is what economists call a deflationary spiral. Prices drop because no one's buying. Companies cut jobs because revenue falls. Unemployment rises. People spend even less. Prices drop further. It's a vicious cycle that's incredibly hard to escape. And once it starts, central banks have very few tools to fight it, especially when they're already dealing with inflation, debt, and banking crises. This is the fourth layer. An asset bubble collapse combined with a consumer confidence crisis. And it's going to amplify everything else. Now, let's talk about layer 5. Geopolitical instability. Economics doesn't happen in a vacuum. The global system relies on stability. Trade routes, diplomatic relationships, predictable rules. But right now, all of that is under strain. The war in Ukraine has disrupted energy markets and food supplies. Tensions between the US and China are threatening to split the global economy into two competing blocs. The Middle East is a powder keg. Taiwan is a flashpoint. Africa is seeing a wave of coups and instability. And all of this impacts the economy. When energy supplies are disrupted, prices spike. That feeds inflation. When trade routes are threatened, supply chains break down. That causes shortages. When major powers stop cooperating, global investments freeze. That slows growth. In 2008, the world was relatively stable geopolitically. Yes, there were conflicts, but the major powers were mostly aligned on keeping the global economy functioning. Today, that alignment is gone. China and the US are in a Cold War. Russia is isolated and lashing out. Europe is fracturing politically. And in this environment, a financial crisis doesn't just stay financial. It becomes political. It becomes social. It becomes violent. History shows us this. The Great Depression didn't just cause economic pain. It led to the rise of fascism, World War, and the collapse of entire governments. When people lose everything, they look for someone to blame. And politicians are more than happy to provide scapegoats. Immigrants, elites, foreign powers, the other political party. It doesn't matter if the blame is justified. What matters is that it channels the anger. And in a world with nuclear weapons, cyber warfare, and fragile supply chains, that anger can spiral into something far more dangerous than a stock market crash. This is the fifth layer. The feedback loop between economic collapse and geopolitical chaos. And it's something that didn't exist to this degree in 2008. Back then, governments could coordinate. The G20 met and agreed on stimulus measures. Central banks worked together. Today, that cooperation is breaking down. Countries are looking inward. Nationalism is rising. Trust is eroding. And when the next crisis hits, instead of working together to solve it, nations are more likely to turn on each other. Competitive devaluations, trade wars, resource grabs. Every country trying to save itself at the expense of others. That's not a recipe for recovery. That's a recipe for prolonged disaster. Layer 6. The collapse of trust. This one's more abstract, but it's just as important as the others. Financial systems run on trust. You trust that your bank will give you your money when you ask for it. You trust that your currency will hold its value. You trust that governments will honor their debts. You trust that markets are fair and transparent. But what happens when that trust breaks? We got a glimpse in 2008. People stopped trusting banks. They pulled their money out. Banks nearly collapsed. People stopped trusting the financial system. They protested. They demanded accountability. But the system survived because governments stepped in and reassured everyone. They bailed out the banks. They promised reforms. They restored confidence. This time, it's not going to be that easy, because trust has already eroded. People saw that the banks got bailed out, but homeowners didn't. They saw that executives kept their bonuses while workers lost their jobs. They saw that the system protects the powerful and leaves everyone else to suffer. And they haven't forgotten. Since 2008, wealth inequality has exploded. The richest 1% have gotten richer. The middle class has stagnated. Younger generations can't afford homes. They're drowning in student debt. They don't believe they'll ever retire. There's a deep, simmering resentment. And when the next crisis hits, that resentment is going to boil over. People aren't going to accept another bailout for Wall Street. They're not going to quietly accept austerity while billionaires keep flying private jets. And governments know this. Which means they're going to be paralyzed. They won't be able to use the same playbook as 2008 because the public won't allow it. But they also don't have any other tools. So what happens? Chaos, protests, strikes, political upheaval. And in that environment, making rational economic decisions becomes nearly impossible. This is the sixth layer. A crisis of legitimacy, not just in markets, but in the entire system. People are going to start asking fundamental questions. Why do we let banks create money out of thin air? Why do we trust governments that can't balance a budget? Why do we accept a system that makes the rich richer during every crisis? These aren't just economic questions. They're existential questions about how society is organized. And when millions of people start asking them at the same time, the answers can get radical. Some will turn to authoritarian leaders who promise order. Some will turn to populist movements that promise to tear down the elites. Some will turn to alternative systems, cryptocurrencies, local currencies, barter networks. The point is, the center won't hold. And that makes recovery far more difficult. Because recovery requires coordination. It requires trust. It requires people believing that if they make sacrifices now, things will get better later. But if people don't trust the system, why would they make those sacrifices? They won't. They'll look out for themselves. Hoard resources. Pull money out of banks. Stop paying taxes. And that accelerates the collapse. This is what makes the next crisis different from 2008. It's not just financial. It's social, political, psychological. It's a crisis of the entire modern system. And that brings us to layer 7. The final layer. The biggest threat of all. The lack of solutions. In 2008, the solution was clear. Lower interest rates. Print money. Bail out the banks. It was painful, but it worked. Now, those tools are either exhausted or unusable. Interest rates can't go much lower without causing other problems. Printing money causes inflation. Bailouts cause political backlash. And governments are already drowning in debt, so they can't afford massive stimulus programs. So what's left? Some economists talk about helicopter money, just giving cash directly to citizens. But that's never been tried on a large scale, and it could trigger hyperinflation. Others talk about debt jubilees, just canceling debts. But that would destroy the credibility of the entire financial system. Others talk about central bank digital currencies, government-controlled money that can be programmed and tracked. But that raises massive concerns about privacy and freedom. There's no clean solution. Every option comes with catastrophic risks. And that's the scariest part. In 2008, policymakers knew what to do. They'd seen similar crises before. They had models. They had playbooks. This time, we're in uncharted territory. The combination of debt, inflation, geopolitical instability, and social unrest is something the modern world has never faced. Not at this scale. Not all at once. And the people in charge, central bankers, finance ministers, politicians, they're making it up as they go. They're hoping that somehow, things will stabilize. That inflation will come down without crashing the economy. That debt levels will become manageable without defaults. That geopolitical tensions will ease without war. That people will stay calm without losing faith in the system. But hope isn't a strategy. And the odds of all those things happening at once? Close to zero. So here's what's really going on. We're watching the slow unraveling of the post-2008 financial order. The system that was held together by cheap money, low rates, and endless debt is breaking. And when it finally snaps, the impact is going to be worse than 2008. Not because the initial shock is bigger, but because the system is weaker. The tools are fewer. The trust is gone. And this time, there's no safety net. Governments can't afford to bail everyone out. Central banks can't fix it with low rates. And the public won't accept the burden being placed on their shoulders again. So what does that mean for you? It means the next few years are going to be brutal. Job losses, asset crashes, currency instability, rising costs. And unlike 2008, recovery isn't guaranteed. It could take decades. It could fundamentally reshape the global economy. Or it could lead to something even darker. Because when systems collapse, they don't just reset to the way things were. They transform into something new. Sometimes better. More often worse. The question isn't whether the next financial shock is coming. It's what kind of world we'll be living in when the dust settles. Will it be a world where government seize more control to maintain order? Will it be a world where new currencies and systems replace the old ones? Will it be a world where inequality deepens even further? Or will it be a world where people finally demand a system that works for everyone, not just the few at the top? I don't have that answer. But I do know this. The warning signs are everywhere. The debt, the instability, the bubbles, the geopolitical chaos, the lack of solutions. It's all pointing in one direction. And pretending it's not happening won't change what's coming. So here's what you can do. Pay attention. Educate yourself. Understand the systems that control your life. Don't trust the people who tell you everything's fine. They said that in 2007 too. Build resilience. Financially, socially, mentally. Because when the system breaks, the people who survive are the ones who prepared. Not with panic. Not with fear. But with knowledge and awareness. The next financial shock is coming. And it will make 2008 look small. Not because I want it to. But because the math, the history, and the incentives all point that way. The only question left is, will you be ready? If this video opened your eyes to what's really happening, then I need you to do something. Share it. Talk about it. Because the mainstream won't tell you this. They'll keep saying everything's fine until it's too late. Drop a comment and tell me, do you think there's any way to stop this, or are we past the point of no return? And if you want to keep learning about what's really happening in the world, hit subscribe. Because I'll be here, breaking it down, no matter what comes next. Thank you for watching. Stay sharp. Stay informed. And I'll see you in the next video.